Episode 110, Paul.
Can you believe it?
The last 10 have come really quick after that 100 milestone.
Yeah, I can't believe it. It's where's the time gone? But yeah, nice way to celebrate the 110th episode today.
Why is that?
Because we've got an incredibly special guest.
We got a really special guest
from far away.
Yeah, from the States. So, we've often said that aviation and America are kind of words that go together. I mean, how jealous are you of people that live in the States that can get to go to these air shows and things like that?
Don't even get me started.
Yeah.
I mean, aviation is America, man.
Exactly. Yeah. So if things like Oshkosh and the Reno Air Race are part of your bucket list, then today's guest is the guy that you want to know. Our guest today is Ron Kaplan. Ron currently serves as founder and executive director of the Ohio Air and Space Hall of Fame and Museum in Columbus. In 2017, he left the National Aviation Hall of Fame after a 19-year contractor and staff tenure that included 4 as executive director. In 2018, he secured a grant of $550,000 toward establishing the non-profit Ohio Air and Space Hall of Fame and to renovate the 1929 Port Columbus Air Terminal into its home. A capital campaign to raise additional funds required to commence work on the 93-year-old Art Deco-style terminal is currently underway. Ron grew up with an avid interest in aviation history, thanks to his father, a former B-25 pilot instructor and private pilot. He attended Ohio University for 2 years, studying graphic design and communications. While at university, he created Surf Ohio, originally a t-shirt line that is now trademarked and licensed a lifestyle brand. In 1982, he founded Kaplan Graphics, an imprinted sportswear company that he sold in 1994 to turn his then hobby as an aviation artist, journalist, and photographer into a full-time career. Ron went on to earn international acclaim for his illustrations of aircraft insignia and hand-printed reproductions of vintage World War II nose art on leather flight jackets, scrap aluminium, and actual aircraft. Among his clients were Air and Space Magazine, the Smithsonian Air and Space Society, Nike, Chuck Yeager Incorporated, the Miss America P-51 Air Racing Team, the Memphis Belle Memorial Association, and many other individuals, including World War II veteran aviators and warbird operators. Ron was an artist member of the American Society of Aviation Artists, the U.S. Air Force Art Program, and a charter member of the International Society of Aviation Photographers. He has been a contributing editor to Flight Journal and a columnist for Warbird Digest magazines. He is also a co-founder and co-director of the annual National Aviation Heritage International, created in 1999 in partnership with the Reno Air Racing Association and the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. In 2012, he launched Real Stuff Aviation Resources, a consultancy dedicated to the development, creation, and public appreciation of aviation cinema and broadcast projects. Real Stuff also provides marketing, production, branding, and public relations services with a client list that includes the Air Force Museum Foundation, Aviation Community Foundation, Bremont Watch Company, Army Aviation Association of America, Tacker Watch Company, and the Columbus Center of Science of Industry, among others. Ron, it's fantastic to have you on the show with us today. Welcome.
Thanks. I guess the show's about over now that you've read that.
Yeah, so I said we got an hour, so that's about done, eh?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
Well, Ryan's the one that actually found you, Paul, so thanks.
No, listen, I got to give all credit and a shout out to a mutual friend of ours, both Ron and myself, Neil, who's a 777 captain for Emirates. He was on the phone to me a couple of weeks back, and we were having a little chat, and we got talking about the podcast, and he said to me, listen, man, I think I've got someone really, really interesting that you guys would probably enjoy talking to on the podcast. and he mentioned Ron's name, and he very kindly, set an introduction up, and we've got to know each other sort of over the last couple of weeks through email exchanges and messages, and Neil wasn't far wrong. It's not very often that us here at the southern tip of Africa get to meet guys of Ron's caliber, and get to meet people like you, or chat with guys like you who've done as much in aviation as you have, because that's quite a bio you've got there.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'll point out that I'm not a pilot, so I'm one of those examples we'll probably talk about later when we talk about the aviation industry, where you don't have to be a pilot to find a place in aviation. It's a big tent.
Yeah.
And there's room for everybody in it. And as you guys know, it's a great career, just a great community. And look at us. I mean, we're, talk about connectivity in aviation and it being a small community. Meeting Neil at Oshkosh of all places, and here years later, I'm on your show. It just speaks to the amazing world that aviation is.
Yeah, it's quite funny because as big as aviation is, it's actually such a small world and industry, to a degree. Like you said, what are the chances that this all comes together? Really cool.
Quite amazing. But, with that intro, I thought I'm going to try and cut this down as much as I could, but some of that stuff in there, you can't leave out. It's so interesting. And it, it sets a foundation, I suppose, for what we'll chat about today. Ron, you might not realize this, but a real bucket list item for so many South Africans, I suppose anyone that's stuck in these far reaches of the world, Ron. Reno, Oshkosh, high up on the list. And I mean, if I get to go there once in my life, I'll be very grateful. Ron sent us a whole whack of pictures before the show. And I was looking at these and going like, okay, which year? Because there's like, those pictures you show of people as they get older, ever so slightly every year, they show them in these constant pictures. And that's the impression I got. So Ron's obviously been to a whole lot of these events, and really, really jealous. You've got to rub shoulders with some really cool people. And you mentioned at the beginning there, you're not a pilot, and yet you are more entwined in aviation than I think a lot of pilots are. So Ron, just take us back and just let us know, how the hell did you get to where you are today with this much enthusiasm without actually becoming a pilot?
Well, you mentioned my dad. He was a B-25 pilot instructor. Like a lot of baby boomers here in the States, we had relatives that were in World War II. So I grew up with a knowledge that Dad had flown, the B-25s. We had other relatives that were in other services. I've got three brothers, two older and one younger. And for some reason, I'm the one that got bit by the aviation bug. So even as a kid, I was fascinated with airplanes. And I also had art in my DNA, or creativity. So I was really an artist from an early age. So I was drawing airplanes all the time. And of course, when I got old enough, was building models. I still have a note from a school teacher from, I think it was 5th grade, admonishing me for drawing pictures of Eddie Rickenbacker's Spad and the Red Baron in the margins of my math lessons. And she sent that letter home to my parents. And I think their response was something like, well, he could be doing worse things.
Yeah.
So they were super supportive. I love to read. So I either spent my allowance money on model airplanes or books, aviation books, growing up. And I still have that entire library, believe me. And most of it was centered on World War II air combat. So, that was always in my DNA, so to speak. But for a career, I went the graphic design route, as mentioned, and actually was in college for that. Didn't graduate because I dropped out to start my own business. I got into t-shirt printing as a teenager, and by college was doing that as much as I was doing anything else, or in fact maybe more than studying. So I ended up going into the printed apparel business, and this was the early 1980s, so it was a great time here in the United States to be doing that. Big business. I didn't have a big company. I had a small company, but we became well known. You mentioned Surf Ohio. That was kind of my flagship design that I first created when I was in college. So I really went off, doing the graphics and t-shirt thing. I also dabbled in journalism at the time, and I wrote for some t-shirt trade publications and shot my own photographs for the articles that I wrote. So that got me into journalism professionally, you could say. And for 12, 15 years, that's what I was doing. And of course, I enjoyed doing t-shirts for air shows, local air shows. And this was in Columbus, Ohio, my hometown. So Eddie Rickenbacker was obviously quite famous as a native of Columbus. So Lockbourne Air Force Base was renamed Rickenbacker Air Force Base, and they would have an open house every so often. And I did t-shirts that were sold at the air show, and I did them for some of the Air Guard units that were based. But other than that, really, I bought Air Classics magazine every so often, and I had airplane pictures on my dorm room wall when I was in college, but really wasn't that involved. And then what happened was I started to get burnt out on my business, the t-shirt business, and was looking for a creative outlet, and decided that I would start painting aviation subjects in my spare time at home. I set up a home studio, and that was about the time that the first Gulf War broke out. So I don't know if you there remember, how this went down, but this was 1990, 91. It brought a whole new focus to military hardware, including air power. And I ended up doing t-shirts for the 23rd Tactical Fighter Wing, which were the A-10s that were over in the Gulf, with their lineage tracing back to the Flying Tigers. And I did t-shirts with F-18s and Apache helicopters, and it was a pretty big thing back then. And it really kind of got me back, excited about military aviation, military history. So I started, I wanted to paint leather flight jackets. I thought that was pretty cool. I'd seen some pictures from World War II of the B-17 crews and the bomber crews wearing painted jackets. And better yet, they had the Varga girls on them, the pinup girls. And I thought, well, that would be kind of cool to replicate some of these pinup girl flight jackets. And I started doing that. And with the Gulf War, I switched over and I did an A-10 on the back of a jacket. And one of the air show contacts I had said, you ought to come to an air show I'm producing in West Virginia and show that to some of these pilots of these warbirds and stuff. So I took them up on the offer and went to the air show. And of course, knowing somebody that's producing the show is helpful. I was, had kind of the behind the scenes, all access pass, if you will. And sure enough, I got commissioned by an owner of a BT-13 to paint his jacket. And better yet, he said, hey, how about next week you meet us at Portsmouth, Ohio? We're going to do some formation flying. And I got my first warbird ride in a T6 and my first air-to-air photography that day, shooting pictures of the BT-13. And it was pretty cool because I used one of those pictures to paint from when I illustrated this gentleman's airplane on the back of his flight jacket. Of course, once others saw that, it kind of got the ball rolling. Meanwhile, I was thinking about selling my t-shirt company, and that took a few years to happen while my art business was picking up. And by 1994, I sold my share of the business to my business partner and decided to go into aviation art full time, and also journalism, because traveling around the country to different air shows and different airports, I was able to find some interesting stories about aircraft restorations or aircraft auctions or whatever was going on. And in 1996, started writing for Flight Journal magazine, which was brand new at that time, and a great magazine. And I ended up contributing to that magazine for, over 15 years. So, and then I have to point out that in 1994, I wanted to get into air show production or promotion using my event experience from the t-shirt business and my passion for aviation. And someone connected me with the Aviation Safety Institute, which was located in Columbus, Ohio. It's a national organization, nonprofit. And the director there wanted to produce an air show as a fundraiser for the organization, and saw in me someone who could help him do that. And we set about trying to make that happen. And in the process, he wanted to. He heard me complaining that I was always behind schedule on painting flight jackets, so he suggested I meet his niece, who was going to meet him at the Dayton Air Show, which was coming up, and at that time it was also a trade show. So the Aviation Safety Institute had a booth. Leo Janssens was running the booth, the director, and he said, "Why don't you meet my niece? She lives in Dayton. She's a mechanical engineer, but she's also an artist, and she could probably help you paint jackets." So I very grudgingly came off the flight line at the Dayton Air Show that year to go into the trade show building and meet Leo's niece. Great inconvenience to me, taking pictures of airplanes. And I met Jennifer, and a year later we were married. We've been married for 26 years now. So had to throw that in there, that aviation's been very, very good to me. I met my wife at the 1994 Dayton Air Show as a result. So with that, we got married in 1995. I moved to Dayton, Ohio. A lot of people thought I moved to Dayton because of it's the birthplace of aviation, home of the Wright brothers and all. But it was really because I met a girl, my wife. So, but not a bad place to, for me to move my studio to. And I was actually covering the National Aviation Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremonies over the course of several years for Flight Journal magazine. And that's one of the ways I met the director of the Hall of Fame. And in 1998, he sat me down and said, "How would you like to be our development director?" And I said, "Sure, what's that?" And I was hired in 1998, and as mentioned, had a 19-year career with the National Aviation Hall of Fame. But I have to preface that while I was doing the aviation art, met a gentleman from Maxwell Air Force Base down in Alabama, who produced what's called the Gathering of Eagles each year down there at Maxwell, and that's for the Air Command and Staff College of the U.S. Air Force. And they would bring in 16 aviators from around the world, famous aviators, each year for their graduation week. And they would have seminars and barbecues and all kinds of things that week of graduation for the cadets down there, culminating with a black tie gala banquet. And the gentleman running that had seen me at an air show in Louisville, working with some of the famous fighter aces from World War II that I had autographing artwork for me that I would then sell. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come down and help me with this? I need help." So as a civilian, I went down there for several years each June and helped with the Gathering of Eagles. And that's where I got to meet many of these people who later became friends, but also some of them were already enshrined in the National Aviation Hall of Fame, and others were later under my tenure there. And that's one of the reasons I was hired at the Hall of Fame, because I wasn't starstruck. I already knew people like Chuck Yeager and Joe Foss and Tex Hill and Robin Olds. I worked with Paul Tibbets in 1995 on a project. So, and then once I was at the National Aviation Hall of Fame, that was really the job, was to honor all these people and also oversee the process of new ones being nominated and inducted in. With that, maybe I'll pause after the world's longest sentence.
No, keep going.
Well, I mean, that's what kind of pushed me into this world of meeting heroes I read about as a kid. And I mean, it's still astounding, to me. I mean, to have befriended people like Bob Hoover, for instance, and Gene Cernan and Neil Armstrong, and to this day, I work with and keep in touch with many of them. In fact, in a few weeks, I'll be at Reno again for the 21st year of the National Aviation Heritage Invitational. And we will have, I think we have 5 Hall of Fame enshrinees with us out there, including Dick Rutan and General Pat Brady, Sean Tucker, Clay Lacey, Bud Anderson, Hoot Gibson. They'll be with us to help present the trophies to the recipients out there at the Invitational.
So, in other words, a few of the smaller names in the world of aviation. I just got to throw it in there, you know.
I mean, you know, imagine being a kid from Columbus, Ohio, and then, you know, getting to meet and spend a lot of time with the people, you know, like that, and not just in aviation. I mean, veterans. Matter of fact, when we're done with this, I'm going over 6 miles from my house. Lives a gentleman named Jim Pee Wee Martin. He's one of the last surviving 101st Airborne Screaming Eagles. The Band of Brothers, if you will. Band of Brothers was about the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, E Company, Easy Company. And Pee Wee was in G Company. And he's 101 years old. And sadly, he's not doing real well. I try to go over twice a month to have lunch at his house. And I think today we're not having lunch, but I just want to check in on him because he's not doing well. But I mean, these are real heroes, and you know, to be able to play a role in preserving their legacy, whether it's through my art or through the National Aviation Hall of Fame, as I did, and now with the Ohio Air and Space Hall of Fame, we'll be doing it for aviation pioneers from the state of Ohio. So obviously that's not national, but it's my home state, and being the birthplace of aviation as we are, you know, there's plenty of people that should be recognized, and we'll start doing that soon, hopefully, at the Ohio Air and Space Hall of Fame.
I think it's such a remarkable thing, you know, preserving a legacy. I've never thought of it like in the aviation industry. I've heard sportsmen talk about it. Dan Carter, ex-New Zealand rugby player, he spoke about it on podcast we enjoy, High Performance Podcast.
Yes.
About, you know, their role when they play for the All Black rugby team, where he said, you're just a custodian of that jersey. You're just protecting the legacy. And here you've got someone that's like, you know, protecting a legacy of the industry that has sort of been so good to us, eh, Ron? I mean, you know, it's paying for you to have a wife and children, and, you know, it's been good to us in lots of ways. We've spent a lot of the time over the past 2 years, we've spoken about a few negative, you know, aspects of it. You know, with COVID and everything, it wasn't kind to everyone. But to hear someone actually talk about preserving its legacy and those people, it's actually quite a nice thing and a nice change of pace to hear.
Not only that, but I think what's incredible is you're preserving a legacy over an enormous expanse of time. I mean, sportsmen, you know, they have, a career of 20 to 30 years if they're lucky.
5 years now.
Yeah, they're such short-lived careers. And now you're talking about someone like, you know.
Yeah, amazing.
The guys that have been flying for 50, 60 years almost. It's an amazing expanse of time to, you know, keep a legacy over. And, Ron, you're doing an incredible job. It's a really fascinating world that you live in.
Yeah, it's about the people. And, you know, you talk about Oshkosh, and I just read a story a gentleman wrote. It was his first time at Oshkosh this year, and he wrote a beautiful account of it. And it's not the first time someone like that comes around to finishing the story of saying, you know what, with 14,000 airplanes there of all shapes and sizes, it comes down to the people. Oshkosh is about the people, which is really just the industry, you know, I think in general. And everyone, it's kind of interesting as I spoke to these, what we call giants of aviation or heroes of flight. They all were inspired by someone, you know, at a young age. And I remember Don Lopez. Don Lopez was not only an ace with the Flying Tigers in World War II, but he was also a director at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. And he was inspired by Charles Lindbergh. You know, I think as a kid, he went to a parade when Lindbergh came back after, you know, his 1927 flight to Paris. And that inspired Don Lopez, who himself becomes a hero to, you know, to so many others. And so I kind of liken aviation as a tapestry, and there's threads that run through it, and we're all a thread, whether we know it or not. We're a thread. Now, some threads are bigger than others, When you talk about someone like a Neil Armstrong or obviously the Wright brothers, but it's a beautiful tapestry, and it keeps getting woven, and it will keep getting woven. In fact, when I was at the National Aviation Hall of Fame, every year we would induct typically four people into the new class for that year. And on the ballot was maybe over 200 people. So it could take a while before someone gets nominated and elected in. But several people over time said, you know what, we're going to run out of enshrinees.
Mm.
And I looked at them and I said, no, we're not.
Yeah.
When you're living in the moment today, it may be hard to recognize who is a trailblazer and who's a true pioneer. But I will give you an example. Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Holy smokes! Look what Elon Musk has done for the exploration of space. And then there's other people whose names we don't know right now that are working in electric powered vehicles, for instance. The urban air mobility sector, which is a new booming sector of aviation. And there will be people there that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, if it wasn't for him, we would never have this in our world, a positive aviation thing or aerospace thing.
Mm.
So it's really the people, and it's just been a blast, to meet and work with them. Now, as a kid, Eddie Rickenbacker was my hero, and he was still alive when I was a youngster. And I still have 2 copies of his autobiography. The first one my dad bought and had Eddie Rickenbacker autograph. He met him at a book signing when he was traveling. And I was probably 10 years old. And then I wore that book out and bought another copy and had Eddie Rickenbacker sign it as well. He sent me a little card to put in it. But I wrote to Eddie Rickenbacker twice, and he wrote back. And I still have those letters. And I can really point to my dad and Eddie Rickenbacker as being the motivation for me getting so involved in aviation. So it's real important that we honor these legacies, that people are recognized, and they're not just all pilots. There's engineers, there's inventors, there's industrialists. My son and I just did a road trip up to Michigan, to Ypsilanti, which is the home of Willow Run. That was the Ford factory. Henry Ford built a factory in World War II to build B-24 bombers, for the war effort. And so there's Henry Ford, not a pilot, but he built this factory that produced a B-24 an hour at its peak during World War II. Sure. And to be at the museum and see that factory and stand on that ground was super meaningful, both to me and my 21-year-old son, who's just fascinated with history in general, but obviously, because of me, kind of has a focus on aviation as well. So it's just real important to that we preserve those legacies and those artifacts and whatever we can that goes with it, and then tell the story compellingly.
Yeah,
it's exceptionally important. Ron, quick question, if you don't mind. I'd like to know, what are the criteria to getting nominated in the National Aviation Hall of Fame? Or, how does it work? How does one become nominated? Because, for instance, if Brian and myself wanted to,
I was going to say, just be careful here, Ron. Ryan's got a way of worming his way into things. So.
And that's why they have what's called a screening committee.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I can't speak, it's been 5 years since I've been there. And that process was always being scrutinized internally by the board and by the staff. Having been there 19 years, I saw it all. But it's very simple to start with. I think online on the website, they have a nomination page, and you go there and it basically asks that you submit a 1-page bio of the person you're proposing be considered. Okay. Obviously, that bio is important, has to be no more than 1 page. And then it does go to a screening committee, and they look at it to make sure that it's not an airline pilot from South Africa, but but truly, people would nominate their flight instructor, and that they would get screened out. But the screening committee is made up of not only board members, but typically, I think, a couple of previous enshrinees, and then they just make sure the person's worthy enough to go on to the ballot. And then once they're on the ballot, like I said, that when I was there was over 200 people on the ballot. There's a board of elections that I think numbers about 100 people across the United States, many of them former enshrinees, and they all vote. I won't get into the hairy details, but I know at some point they had to split it between people whose achievements were from 1945 and prior to 1945 and afterwards, just to kind of split them up. And what that also did is, from the production standpoint of putting on the enshrinement ceremony, which was one of my main jobs every year, we would have a couple of people who actually were alive who were being inducted, and then there was people who had passed away. So it's I'll call it a rigorous process, and I'm almost certain it's changed a little bit due to COVID and other things. But that's it in a nutshell. And actually, for the Ohio Air and Space Hall of Fame, we have yet to establish our process for doing that. And we'll look to the National Aviation Hall of Fame, but we may tweak ours as well, because I know some halls of fame across the country divide it by their area of expertise or achievement. So they'll have inventors, they'll have engineers, they'll have industrialists, and they'll divide it that way. So that probably confused you more than it helped you, but
no, not at all.
So long story short, that the Brown Air podcast crew might not get past the screening phase yet.
Yeah.
And
there's an age limitation.
I think I suggest that you establish the South African Aviation Hall of Fame, and that might be your best bet. Make you be the charter inductee and get the ball rolling.
Only thing is, with that, I mean, I would imagine the size of the building of the South African Aviation Hall of Fame versus what it is in the States is going to be significantly smaller.
You know what I found interesting, Ron, as a podcaster, I went down the direction of, so Ron and I, bit of background on us, we did our CRJ conversions together back in 2010. We've been best mates ever since. And when I started the podcast, it was going to be an interview-based podcast. And I soon realized that, you've only got a certain amount of people that you can go and interview. And I chose to change tack a bit and rather do a show with Ryan where we, chat about the news every week, and every so often get someone like yourself on the show and change it up a bit. But I'm very interested. How do you meet these people? Because I know how difficult it is to actually, connect with people. And, even if the podcast is always a good excuse, it was a good excuse to chat to you today. We probably wouldn't be having an hour conversation with you today had we not had the podcast. So there's a huge amount of value in being able to say, hey, Ron, I've got this podcast. Can we have a chat? But without that, it might be quite difficult. You've mentioned names like Neil Armstrong and that there. How do those people, hear about what you're doing and come to you, or do you reach out and go to them? How do those connections work?
Well, I can't say that they hear of me and reach out to me as far as the caliber of people like that. I don't know. I guess I've always been resourceful. When I had my T-shirt company and I had Surf Ohio. I mean, I'll give you an example. I created the shirts in 1978. It's a spoof on surfing in Ohio, obviously.
Yeah.
If you know the terrain. That was another interest of mine growing up. That's a whole nother podcast. But when I had the T-shirts, I also had a background in media. In college, I took a lot of journalism. I took a lot of media courses, and I came to know how, at that time in the late 70s, how the newsrooms operated, things like that. And I also knew that as a small business person, I couldn't afford to buy advertising, but I could afford to get attention And how could I do that? And one of the things I thought was getting these Surf Ohio shirts on celebrities that people would notice and would make sense and would give me some street credibility, right? And of course, with Surf Ohio, who would you want them on the most but the Beach Boys in 1978? And I saw an article in the Columbus Dispatch, our local paper, that the Beach Boys, one of their stage musicians, was from Columbus, Ohio. And they interviewed his mom and I think him. And I was like, you know what? It'd be awesome if I could get these Surf Ohio shirts on the Beach Boys, get some pictures of that. Now this is pre-internet too, which, sadly, but so I called up this guy's mom and she said, "Oh, come over. He's going to be home next week." And, long story short, I met this Sterling Smith, one of the best studio musicians in Los Angeles. And at that time was on the tour with the Beach Boys. And he said, "Come down to Cincinnati. We've got a show. I'll get the shirts to the Beach Boys and I'll wear one on stage." And so I did that, and it started a relationship with the Beach Boys that continues to this day. And for years after that, I would give them shirts backstage when they would perform in Ohio and sometimes other locations too. And I have, picked Dennis Wilson, if you know anything about the Beach Boys, was the drummer who sadly drowned in, I think, 1984. I've got wonderful pictures of him wearing a Surf Ohio shirt at the Ohio State Fair in front of 50,000 people, playing the drums. And so the point is, you pick up the phone or you ask for help, and people generally are happy to help. And I try to do that as well. I've been doing it with jacket artists who want to know, how do I paint a leather flight jacket? Happy to help them. If somebody, needs an introduction to somebody to get them to speak at their fundraising gala, I'm happy to make the connection. I can't guarantee anything, of course, but people did that for me. Like Colonel McFarland, who I mentioned with, I didn't mention by name, but with the Gathering of Eagles, that invitation for me to go down and help at Maxwell Air Force Base. And it was work. I mean, I was working for 4 days down there, but shoot, it wasn't work to me because I'm getting to meet Israeli fighter aces. I'm getting to meet Nepalese helicopter pilots that made rescues from Mount Everest. I'm, and making these connections. And some of these people I never saw again, and some of them, went on to, I did art projects with, interestingly, even met Luftwaffe aces, Gunther Rahl. I got to spend a lot of time with Gunther Rahl here in the United States. Famous, German fighter ace. What a character. And did some artwork with him, but just, getting to know him and spend time with him. So if I wanted to meet another Luftwaffe ace, I could probably call Gunther Rahl at the time and say, "Hey, could you introduce me to?" So I think it's just, being passionate helps. I mean, if you're in the industry and you have the good sense to ask for help, and then you have the good sense to listen, people will generally, provide you, what you're asking for.
I love that, Ron.
I couldn't have.
I can hear you itching to talk. That's why I jumped in there first.
That's incredible. I mean, it's like listening to what Ron is saying. It kind of resonates with so much of the stuff that we've mentioned in the show before. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help. Get out there. Expand your network. Reach out, and it does wonders. And Ron, your passion is actually quite infectious. I mean, we've never met in person, but it's just it's incredible. It's what an energy.
And I've been listening. I think you're probably the same. I've been listening here to Ron like I listen to a podcast, and then every now and again I say, "Shit, I better think what I'm going to say next," because I'm getting lost in like I'm listening to a podcast. Really, really nice conversation, and just so many different experiences, I suppose, to what we are used to. Exactly. Ron, give us an idea. Part of one of the topics last week on our show, the air show season is sort of starting here again in South Africa again. It's been shut down for the past couple of years, and there's a bit of excitement, I think, and what's it, next week or week after, it starts there at Rand and then moves across to aerospace and defense. And, obviously, small fry compared to what we're talking about in America there. But just give us an idea, how are things now at the moment on the the sort of tour scene, the air show scene. It's been very, shut down this side of the world, and we see the pictures and that. But how is sort of general aviation and that side of things looking at the moment?
Well, it looks great. Of course, there's a few shows I go to every year. I actually am looking at going to some I've never been to before, making an effort next year to do that. But Oshkosh is kind of the barometer for me. And last year was the first year back. And boy, the energy was palpable. I mean, everybody wanted to get back and be staring up at airplanes or looking, climbing in and out of airplanes and talking airplanes. And so it was like a record crowd last year. This year, just last month, they topped that again. I think it was 655,000 people over the week. It was fantastic. Now, it helped that it's a week-long event and they had the best weather I can remember in 30 years. So, that was great. And Reno last year was okay. It was still a little dicey with the mask mandates and things that were going on. Now in the state of Nevada, at least up at Reno, was a little different than it was in Las Vegas, a little looser on those requirements. This year we don't have those, so I expect another big Reno next month. And then I really haven't been to any other smaller shows, to be honest. Wish I had. So I'm excited. Next June, Columbus, Ohio, my hometown, they're having an air show at Rickenbacker Air Guard Base, which is also an international airport. And they have the Blue Angels already scheduled. So that's, that most of our North American air shows they build around one of the military jet teams.
Yeah.
I've had many conversations with air show promoters, pardon me, about the fact that they should build the show without a jet team. And that way, if they don't get one, it's still a good show. And I always get the pushback. Well, we got to have a jet team, So they're going to have the Blue Angels at the Columbus show. It's going to be big. I've talked to the promoter. He promises to have a very history-heavy lineup. There'll be Warbirds. Thankfully, Scott's Miracle Grow is the company sponsoring it. The CEO of Scott's owns and flies a P-51. So I spoke to him, and he says he's going to make sure that it's Warbird heavy. So that's going to be an exciting show right in my backyard next year. But
sure.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's back, and thank heavens. I'm actually going to the National Business Aviation Association convention in October, which is in Orlando, Florida. Now that is, as you may know, our biggest civil aviation convention of its kind, and that's generally it's focused on business corporate aviation.
Yeah.
So that'll be my first time back at that show in 4 years. So I'm excited to see how big that is. Last year I couldn't go because it was in Las Vegas and they had a vaccine mandate.
Okay.
And it really hurt the show. A lot of companies and a lot of people did not go last year. That is not the case this year.
Sure.
Wow.
Ron, if you want a no-jet air show, come to South Africa and there's plenty of those. Yeah. Because we got the classic Harvards and the Pitt specials for the last 20 years, Laka, but yeah.
I have to laugh because next month, our biggest Air Force base here in Pretoria, they're hosting the African Aerospace and Defense Air Show, which is supposed to be quite a big deal here.
I think the only jets that are coming are the Americans.
Yeah, well, we don't have an Air Force anymore, so it's going to be quite funny to see the South African version.
A different aviation world in America for sure.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Well, you probably have some unique restorations there though that we don't see here. I have to believe.
I think there are a few, although I think due to the lack of spare parts and everything, a lot of them aren't actively flying anymore. I mean, we used to have we
had Tony Smith involved with the Spitfire
Yeah.
restoration. Yeah, there is, Ron. There's a lot of passionate aviators in South Africa. That's something you can say for sure. And that's why I think there was such a keenness to get you on, because you speak about the aircraft you have and the people you have, and automatically it's just going to resonate with so many people here. And you do sometimes feel a little bit closed off to the rest of the world. And but like Ron's made quite clear here, we're all kind of this thread in the aviation industry, and it's sort of one big family in a way, because it is actually so small, Ron. It's it's tiny, so it's cool to actually feel kind of connected with what's going on there in the States.
Well, I suggest, like Neil, of course, and others that I've met through him, they build their vacation around Oshkosh.
Yeah.
And you can do that with Reno, and it's a smaller scale, but I remember, well, a couple of things. When I got involved in this in 1991, I remember going to Oshkosh. My first year was 1992, and I remember hearing these old guys saying, how many years have you been coming? And the guy would say, I've been coming for 18 years. And I went, wow, that's crazy, And this year I realized I've been going 30 years. So
no ways.
One thing I just have to say is, you got to start.
Yeah.
And I had a bucket list of North American air shows when I first started getting into this. One of them was Geneseo, New York. I don't know if you've ever heard of that Geneseo air show. I went to that one in 1991. I'd read about it in magazines for years. And a friend said, hey, why don't we drive up? We can rent one of the dorm rooms at the local college, because they rent them out for air show spectators. And I said, okay, let's do it. And I ended up getting my first B-17 ride at that air show on Texas Raiders. And I ended up meeting David Talashay, who owned the movie Memphis Belle B-17. This was 1991. In 1999, he hired me to paint the Memphis Belle nose art back on his airplane. So, my point is, you got to start somewhere and just go. Yeah. And I know that's a long haul from South Africa to the United States, but, that's where I met Neil, having a hamburger and a beer under a tent years ago. And, we're fast friends, and I don't see him but every other year, but it's, it's almost like a week went by. So, it's absolutely worth making the trip, especially now that, we can start to travel again. I know in my case, you probably say, oh yeah, easy for you to say, Ron. I want to get over to England. I have friends going over next month for the Battle of Britain Air Show.
Oh yeah.
And speaking of Spitfires, that's my favorite World War II airplane of all time, especially the early marks. And I'm so jealous because they're going over there, and they said, I think there's going to be 16 or 18 Spitfires of different marks flying in the Battle of Britain Air Show, not to mention everything else, the Hurricanes and the Lysanders and everything else they have. So I've yet to go over to England and make that trip. And so I still have a bucket list, believe me, and that's on it.
Well, we got one or two contacts in the UK, so we'll try to put you in touch with someone there that maybe can go there to that show with you.
Hey, yeah, I'll work the network any way I can, believe me.
That's what it's all about. I mean, yeah, Neil told me the story about how you guys met at Oshkosh, and it was quite funny because, if I'm not mistaken, you were sitting next to, was it Dick Rutan? Is that right? Bert Rutan's brother at the time?
Yeah, I actually was working with Dick on a project at Oshkosh that year, and I promised Neil, I'd meet up for lunch, and whatever we were doing with Dick ran late in one of the trade show buildings, and Neil said, "Are you coming?" And I said, "Yeah, can I bring a guest?" And he said, "Sure." And Dick had a golf cart. I didn't have a golf cart, but Dick, and that's a very vital item to have at Oshkosh if you have one.
Okay.
And so we go bombing over to our favorite meeting place for burgers and beer. And I pull up, and pulled up with Dick Rutan and introduced him. And Dick's just a regular guy. He's a great guy. So we had a wonderful time and together and took off. So I guess that it made an impression on Neil.
Yeah, it certainly did. And obviously, it was as a result of you using your network effects to hook up a ride on a go-kart. So slick move there, Ron. Well done.
Like I said, I'll work it any way I can.
Yeah.
You also mentioned Memphis Belle. I've got to throw this in there. Memphis Belle, when I was growing up, was mine and my brother's most favorite movie.
Yeah.
We watched that movie with our grandfather more than 1,000 times.
Yeah.
At one stage, we could recite the words from the beginning to the end of that movie. What an incredible era of aviation that was, and Memphis Belle is like one of my. That's why the B-17, I suppose, is one of my favorites, purely because of that movie as well. But the nose art, were you involved in that on the actual aircraft? You said, Ron?
Well, I'll give you the quick story on that. So for the movie, and I wasn't involved at all, in the movie. That was filmed in 1989. I think it came out in 1990, and that was another thing that kind of pushed me along into painting flight jackets. So I love that movie. I'd love the documentary, William Wyler's documentary, The Memphis Belle. I'd seen that, but I had nothing to do with that. It came out in 1990, and 91 was that Geneseo Air Show. So they had 5 B-17s at Geneseo and a Lancaster and a B-24 in 1991. So I picked the right year to check that off my bucket list. And like I said, I met Dave Talashay there. I had met some of the pilots for the Collings Foundation, which flew 909, which was there, that B-17, and the B-24 All-American. So meeting Dave Talashay and getting to see the airplane that was used in the movie, that was a big deal. That was painted by, I think, Hollywood artists. If you recall, the nose art had a script, Memphis Belle, and the girl was, to me, kind of janky compared to the original World War II art. But, it's Hollywood. And what happened was Dave Talashay flew that airplane in air shows up until 1999, and that movie paint job just finally looked like hell. So he had the airplane repainted, and by that time I'd been working for several years with Bob Morgan, the original Memphis Belle pilot, and the Memphis Belle Memorial Association. The airplane, the original, was down at Memphis on display under a tent, is the best way to describe it. And they were trying to raise money to save the airplane. So with me working with Bob Morgan, reproducing, I would hand paint the Memphis Belle nose art on aluminum. Bob Morgan would autograph it. This would constitute a limited edition. People would buy them, from me at air shows or whatever. The Memphis Belle Memorial Association had me do some artwork for some commemorative stamps that they sold as a fundraiser. And what happened was I think Dave Talashay called them and said, "Hey, I need someone to paint the nose art back on my airplane here in the States." And they said, "Well, you got to call Ron Kaplan." So I got a call from Dave Talashay all these years after meeting him saying, "Would you paint the nose art back on my airplane?" It's at Floyd Bennett Field in New York and in Brooklyn. And we just put the olive drab and gray on it. Now we need the whole thing painted with the markings, the nose art, the serial number, the works. And I said, "Well, I don't do that. I don't do all that other stuff. I can do the nose art." And I thought that would turn him off. And he called back a few days later and he said, "I'd be fine if you just do the nose art. Can you do that?" And I said, "Well, I work for the National Aviation Hall of Fame." And at that time I just started the job 2 years prior. So I said, I can't take off work to do this. And he called back and said, "Could you do it over a weekend?" And anyway, came up with the concept of doing it over 2 weekends. And he flew me up each weekend. I say flew me up. I had commercial flights up to New York and hotel near Floyd Bennett Field. And I painted the nose art back on the hangar. Now, the interesting story was that I convinced him to let me paint the original version from World War II back on the airplane. Which has the block lettering. It's not the script they had on the movie version. And he said, "Sure." And so I did that. And someone else painted the rest of the markings on the rest of the airplane. And it took off on the air show season with that nose art. This is 1999. What I didn't realize was it created a firestorm with the Air Force Museum, which was working to take the original airplane back from Memphis and restore it for the museum. And they did not like the idea that it confused people. I don't know how you get confused. The real one's in Memphis. It's static. It's on display. It's been there forever. And then Dave Talashay has this one that was in the movie. So there was some legal stuff that happened, and the Air Force Museum Foundation trademarked the name and likeness of the Memphis Belle as a result. And that's created a lot of trouble in the aviation art industry. And I think it's, it wasn't called for, but it is what it is. Yeah. So when the airplane needed to be painted yet again, well, first of all, Dave Talashay passed away. His son, John, was managing the airplane. John called me up and said, hey, we need to have it painted again. Would you paint the movie version back on the airplane? And at that time, I think I was director at the Hall of Fame, and I could not break away. So it was up at Geneseo, coincidentally, at that point. And they had someone else paint the artwork on it that you see now, which is, and it plainly says the movie Memphis Belle, and it has the script because the Air Force Museum Foundation lawyers made it very clear that they could not use the original version on the airplane. And of course, now the Air Force Museum has restored the original. It's gorgeous, on display here in Dayton at the Air Force Museum. And that's another bucket list, I think, item for anyone coming over from South Africa. You have to come to Dayton, Ohio, and tour the Air Force Museum, which coincidentally has the National Aviation Hall of Fame adjacent to it. But that's the Memphis Belle story. And I got to fly on that airplane with John Talashay a few years ago when it was in the area, which was fun. But yeah, the Memphis Belle is near and dear to me as well, and that's really largely because of Bob Morgan. He was just a joy to work with. In 1997, we shared air show booths selling. He was selling books and signed autographed pictures, and I was selling the artwork, and that was a real treat to spend that time with him too at air shows.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. This has without doubt been the easiest podcast we will ever do in our lives.
That's for certain.
because normally you got to direct the story, but in this case, it's just people have heard enough from us. So
yeah, exactly.
Nice to listen to the stories. Ron, there's quite a few of those in your pictures you sent. These paintings that are on, not just like the Memphis Belle, but on a few other aircraft. What other aircraft, just out of interest, have you done maybe in recent times?
Well, I haven't actually painted on aircraft for a number of years, and that was for a couple of reasons. When I was with the National Aviation Hall of Fame, that was my job. So, I would call the artwork a lucrative hobby. But I was unable to break away and go traveling to paint nose art. There's some great guys out there here in North America and gals that are painting jackets and nose art right now that are really, they took what I was doing back in the 90s and, taking it to a whole new level. So I occasionally get somebody saying, hey, could you paint something on my T6 or something? And I just can't do it. So now what I do, as you see though, is just to elaborate a little bit on that concept of the aluminum that's autographed. Back in the 90s, I came up with this concept of smaller pieces of aluminum on which I could paint an insignia or nose art of a particular ace or famous pilot. And I would have them autograph the aluminum before I painted the finished product on it. So I have an inventory of over 100 editions. That's over 100 pilots that have signed aluminum, and maybe it's only 10 pieces. So that's the edition, 10 or 12 pieces. And it might even be aluminum from the type of aircraft they flew in combat. And then I will paint their insignia above their name, put it in a shadow box frame. It's Peruvian walnut. You probably have some pictures you can show, but and they're numbered, so it's number 1 of 10 or number 4 of 12 or whatever it is. And sadly, most of those pilots have passed on, especially the World War II generation. There's only a few left, but so collectors find me and buy those. I have thankfully collectors who have 5 or 6 or 8 of those in their collection. Now with seeing that a lot of these World War II heroes are gone, I'm very heartened to see some people are commissioning me simply to do nose art on aluminum. There's no autograph. It's just my artwork. So you've got some pictures of those you can show. and it might be someone whose dad flew a B-17 in Europe, and they want me to replicate their father's nose art on a piece they can put in their office or their den, and that's largely the commissions I'm getting these days, with the occasional collector who wants a particular autograph of their favorite ace or bomber pilot.
That's incredible. That's something really, really special. I mean, what a special gift to be able to, do for someone, or even for yourself.
Yeah, except Ron has ruined things for us in a way, because a man cave now without one of those bits of aluminum art ain't gonna be the same.
It's not
without an aircraft piece there by Ron. Yeah, quite incredible actually. Ron, just on the leather jackets, is that actual? So you actually paint on the back of those leather jackets? Is that it?
Yeah. When I decided to do that, I had a book called Classy Chassis. It's a famous book that's nose art, and it showed a lot of these flight crew in their jackets, and that's kind of what inspired me. And then I realized, shoot, how do you paint on leather? So fortunately, as a teenager, I had a job working for a leather company in Columbus, Ohio, actually making belts. But I called the owner, a dear friend, and I said, do you have any scrap leather you could give me? And sure he did. So I started painting on leather, trying to figure this out the hard way. And then a book came out called Hellbent for Leather, which is another classic now book on leather flight jackets. And I got a hold of the author, and he bounced me to a guy that was pictured in the book, who was currently painting jackets. And he was a little hesitant to help me, but gave me enough hints that I was able to figure this out. So really what it comes down to is stripping the dye and oil off of the jacket where you're going to paint. And in my case, I like to paint a white base coat down, and I use artist acrylics, and I paint the white base coat down. And then at that point, you can sketch on, or you can use templates, so you can draw on the detail of whatever it is, whether it's an aircraft or a pinup girl, and you start painting as if it's a canvas. Now there's little techniques, that involved. And for instance, I use lacquer thinner and Q-tips to strip the dye and the oil off in the area I'm going to paint, which I've outlined on with a white paint pen, using a template in the shape of whatever's going on. So, and it's very tedious. The preparation is really the key, because if you don't do that, the paint will peel off at some point, and you don't want that to happen. And I think there's some people that might use enamels, but I use acrylics because I can paint in the house in my basement. I don't have to use, stinky stuff other than the lacquer thinner when I'm stripping the jacket. But the acrylics don't stink. They last forever. They're pliable. They really work great on leather flight jackets. So that's kind of how I got started, just making sure that it wouldn't peel off after I charged somebody money, to paint their flight jacket.
And how long would it typically take you to, create a piece of art on a leather jacket like that? I suppose it depends on the complexity of the picture, but on average?
Yeah, if I'm painting on the back and it's nose art, it might take me 25 to 40 hours total. I've painted some jackets that took 60 hours. One of the first jackets I ever painted was a gift I gave to the Doolittle Raiders at their 50th anniversary, their 50th reunion in 1992. And I made that a pretty special piece of artwork. And it was one of my earliest jackets too. So that might be one of the reasons it took so long, but it probably took about 60 hours to paint the jacket. And I would, charge accordingly, of course. And the other thing too is some people provided me their flight jackets. For a while, I had a great relationship with Willis and Geiger, they're no longer in business, but they were a long time flight jacket supplier to the United States military, and their owner became a friend and gave me a great deal on the jackets. And so, I could provide you the jacket and the painting for a time.
Sure. Ron, about this stage of the show, there's a few people out there Googling your name. So where would you want to direct people? Where's the best place to find you and to have a look at that art? I will leave a link in the show notes there where people can have a look at all the pictures Ron sent. But where's the best place? Where would you want to direct people, Ron?
It's pretty simple. WarbirdAviationArt.com. It's WarbirdAviationArt.com, all spelled out. That's where you'll find my art business, and you'll see some of the new products I've been working on. Over COVID, I tried to figure out how to scale my art, and ceramic coasters was one of the results. So you see that I sell some coaster sets that are based on my artwork. And then also my Ohio Air and Space project is ohioairandspace.org.
Okay.
Just spell out ohioairandspace.org, and you'll see this. It's an Art Deco 1929 air terminal that we're going to restore and make for the home of our organization. It's one of the earliest commercial air terminals in the world, so it's a very unique project, and super excited about that.
Awesome. I've heard a lot about those coasters, and actually I'm going to see if I can get us some from Ron, because
that's a must now.
I think the studio needs a set.
Ron, seeing that you've given me the permission to go and ask people, I think Ron is someone we're going to need on the show more often than not, as our American correspondent to what's going on there.
I'd be happy to do that. We could, we'll have to give you the Reno report. Soon. We're going to have 22 vintage aircraft competing at the Invitational this year. That's still not up to where I'd like to see it, but between COVID and fuel prices here, that's one of the issues we're having. But that's still a great turnout of antique and vintage aircraft competing for the Invitational at the air races. So, maybe that I can check in with some pictures or something.
That'll be fantastic.
Reno.
Let's do that. We'll pencil that in after the show and get you a post-Reno report. Will be great.
That'll be fantastic. I think, following on from today's conversation, and at least, getting to meet Ron and really hear your story, what better man to have as our American correspondent.
Yeah.
And
I've loved it today.
I'm honored.
Yeah. I've absolutely loved this conversation today.
It's been incredible. I just, again, once more, just want to give a huge shout out to Neil and thank him for the intro, because without that, we wouldn't have met. And really, really
Thanks,
grateful for the connection. And Ron, thanks for your time. It's been an incredible conversation.
It really has.
It's been great to meet you guys. It's super to see what you're doing with your show over there. I kind of feel like a slacker, but I'm an old guy, so I'm lucky to be on Facebook, I guess. But it's great to be on. This was a lot of fun.
I'm just so thankful that Ron doesn't have a podcast, because I don't think anyone will listen to it. That's the truth. Yeah, no, it's been wonderful, Ron. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. And
welcome.
Look forward to having you back on again post Reno for a bit of a report there. Thank you.
I look forward to it. This has really been my pleasure.
Thanks, Ron. Shout on Checklist, Ron. What a conversation today. I loved everything he had to say. I'm so chuffed we made that connection. And this is going to be a long-term friendship with Ron. Really, really cool. Thanks for finding him, Paul.
Hey, what a privilege, man. Yeah, it's not every day you come across the likes of someone of Ron's caliber, and someone who's done so many different and interesting things in aviation. It's not our usual suspects.
Yeah.
And it was a great connection to make. And like you said, I have no doubt that there will be way more conversations that we can have with Ron going forward.
There's going to be plenty. And if you want to see all of Ron's pictures, there's pictures of his warbird art and all the rest. You'll find it on our Discord. That's where it is. I'm going to put them all on there. Yeah. And there'll be a channel thread up. So if that's where they are, you'll see them there. And please connect with him. He's a great guy. Seems like a great connection to have. And I hope you enjoyed the show today.
Yeah, it was really cool. Looking at those pictures that he sent, I just got to throw this in there because I was a bit starstruck myself. Pictures with some of the world's
heavyweights.
Yeah, Morgan Freeman,
Neil Armstrong. There was Kurt Russell.
Yeah, Harrison Ford. Just a few. He really has rubbed shoulders with some big dogs. Yeah, and what a fantastic guy. Loved the conversation today, and I certainly look forward to the next one.
110 for us. It was a good one. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Goodbye for now, everyone.
Remain at frequency 28 right, echo, echo, cleared for takeoff. 28 right, echo, cleared for takeoff, runway heading, range with the limit 36. Yeah, 204, 28 right, echo, echo, line up and wait. 28 right, echo, echo, line up and wait, now at 204. EC40, 103, contact Chicago departure. Good morning. That was 553, uniform, so less than 250 and all another turn. Less than 250, guys, 553, uniform. Tower runway 34. Runway 3494 for now, stand November short of Echo Echo, and we'll work that out. You can expect the full length for departure. November short of Echo Echo, runway 3497. Skywest 553, uniform, turn left heading 220 and contact Chicago departure. Left heading 220, contact departure, Skywest 553, uniform. United 204, fighting 270, 28 right, Echo Echo, cleared for takeoff. 28 right, and Echo Echo, cleared for takeoff, heading 270, United 204. Sky 5169.